The hum of the respirator was the only constant in the room, a soft, rhythmic sigh that counted out the seconds of Liam's new life. He lay beneath the crisp white sheets of the hospital bed, a statue carved from flesh and regret. The diagnosis had been delivered an hour ago by a doctor with tired eyes and a practiced, gentle tone. Severe spinal cord injury, C4 vertebra, complete quadriplegia. The words were clinical, clean, and utterly devastating. They were also a complete and total lie. From his vantage point, immobile and silent, Liam watched his wife, Chloe. She had performed the initial stages of grief with the flawless technique of a seasoned actress. The sharp, disbelieving gasp, the hand flying to her mouth, the slow, perfect tears that traced shimmering paths down her sculpted cheekbones without smudging her mascara. She had clutched his limp hand. He'd focused all his mental energy on ensuring it remained perfectly flaccid, and whispered his name, her voice a fragile, breaking thing. It was a masterful performance. Liam would have applauded if he could. But now the first act was over. The doctor had left, offering condolences and platitudes. The curtain had fallen, and Chloe, believing her audience was gone, had let the mask slip. Her shoulders, which had been racked with delicate sobs, were now still. Her tears had dried with remarkable speed. She released his hand, wiping her own on the fabric of her designer jeans, as if shaking off something unpleasant. She took a deep breath, not of sorrow, but of resolve. She paced the small room, her heels clicking a sharp, impatient rhythm on the linoleum floor. A predator surveying a cage. Liam kept his eyes fixed on a water stain on the ceiling, his breathing shallow and even, mimicking the placid rhythm of the machine beside him. He was a landscape of stillness, a man erased from the neck down. This was the most difficult part he had ever played, demanding a discipline of mind and body he had spent weeks perfecting. Every muscle screamed for release, for a simple twitch or a deep, satisfying breath. But he denied them. He had to. The entire production depended on his absolute stillness. Chloe stopped pacing. She pulled out her phone, her thumbs swiping across the glass. Her brow furrowed in concentration. She was calculating. He could almost hear the gears turning in her mind, the cold, swift arithmetic of loss and opportunity. Finally, she put the phone away and turned back to the bed. She looked at him, but she didn't see a husband. She saw a problem, an asset, a complication. She leaned in close, her scent, expensive, floral, and suddenly cloying, filling his senses. Her voice was a low, conspiratorial whisper, as if she were sharing a secret with a confidant, not speaking to the man she had promised to love in sickness and in health. "Liam," she murmured, her tone now stripped of its earlier fragility. It was practical, businesslike. "Liam, I know you can probably hear me. The doctor said your mind is unaffected." She paused, waiting for a flicker of response that would never come. "We need to be practical about this. Your condition, it changes things. Everything." He felt her fingers brush his arm, a touch devoid of warmth, a cursory check to ensure he was still there. "I was talking to my father," she continued, her voice dropping even lower. "He reminded me about the policy, the one you took out when we got the mortgage." She hesitated, a flash of something, not shame but perhaps a flicker of social awkwardness, crossing her face before it was extinguished. "The life insurance, Liam. Is it one of those policies that pays out for permanent disability? Or just, you know, or just, you know." The unspoken word hung in the sterile air between them. Death. There it was. The question. Not, "Are you scared?" Not, "I'm here for you." Not, "We will get through this." But a question about money. A query about the cash value of his tragedy. A profound, icy calm washed over Liam. It wasn't shock. It wasn't even anger. Not yet. It was the cold, clean satisfaction of a hypothesis confirmed. For months, he had nurtured a growing suspicion, a toxic seed of doubt that had taken root in the fertile soil of her casual cruelties and thoughtless dismissals. He had watered it with observation, fed it with overheard whispers and financial discrepancies. He had built a theory of her heart, and he had designed this grand, terrible experiment to test it. He had predicted this outcome, he had dreaded it, and now, hearing it spoken in her low, urgent whisper, he felt a strange, hollow vindication. He had been right. He had thought their life was a partnership. He now knew it was a transaction, and the bill had just come due. Chloe thought she was assessing her financial future. She had no idea she was auditioning for her own downfall. She and her arrogant, money-obsessed family believed they were standing on solid ground, looking down on him from a great height. They didn't know the ground beneath their feet was a trapdoor, and he was the one holding the lever. Within 3 months, every pillar of their comfortable, condescending world would be turned to dust. We all wonder what the people closest to us truly think, what they would do when the chips are down. Liam was about to get his answer, written in bold, clear letters. If you've ever felt underestimated or unappreciated, this story is for you. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. Now settle in, because the performance was only just beginning. As Chloe finally straightened up, a flicker of frustration on her face at his lack of response, and left the room to make a phone call, to her father, no doubt, Liam allowed a single, minuscule muscle in his jaw to tighten. He didn't look back at the beginning of their love. He looked back at the beginning of the end, to a dinner party 6 months ago, where the first stones of his prison and his liberation had been laid. The scent of roasted lamb and smug superiority filled the dining room of Marcus and Eleanor Vance, Chloe's parents. It was their 30th wedding anniversary, an occasion marked by the gathering of their clan and the quiet, systematic dismantling of Liam's self-worth. The crystal glasses, so thin they seemed to hum with tension, reflected the cold light of the chandelier. The silverware was heavy, old, and like everything else in the house, a testament to the family's long-held belief that wealth was a measure of virtue. Liam sat beside Chloe, a ghost at the feast. He had worn his best suit, a well-tailored but unassuming navy wool, which Eleanor had immediately clocked with a dismissive glance. "Oh, Liam," she'd said, her smile as thin as the wine glasses. "You always look so dependable." It was a compliment shaped like an insult, a recurring theme for the evening. Marcus, a man whose face seemed permanently fixed in a state of mild disappointment with the world, held court at the head of the table. He was a retired investment banker who now managed the family portfolio, a euphemism for passing judgment on the financial prospects of everyone he met. "I was speaking with Julian Croft the other day," Marcus announced, swirling a burgundy so expensive it could have paid Liam's car insurance for a decade. "His son, you remember him, Chloe? The one who started that tech incubator? Just sold his second company for 9 figures. 9. He placed a heavy emphasis on the word, his eyes flicking to Liam for a fraction of a second. The comparison was clear. This is what a son-in-law should be, not you. Liam took a slow sip of water. He met Marcus's gaze with a placid, unreadable smile. "That's wonderful for him," he said, his voice even. "It's a volatile market. He timed it well." Marcus scoffed, a short, percussive sound. "It's not about timing, Liam. It's about vision, ambition. Some people build empires, others build extensions." The jab was aimed at Liam's profession. He was an architect. To the Vances, this meant he was a glorified tradesman, a functionary who drew lines for a living. They had never once asked about the specifics of his work, about the firm he worked for, or the projects he managed. They had simply filed him under stable but uninspired, a safe but boring choice for their dazzling Chloe. Chloe, sitting beside him, shifted uncomfortably. She didn't defend him. She never did. Instead, she offered a weak, placating laugh. "Oh, Daddy, don't be a snob. Not everyone can be a tech billionaire. She patted Liam's arm, a gesture that was meant to look supportive but felt deeply patronizing. It was a gesture that said, "I know you're not much, but you're mine, and I have to manage you in front of my parents." "I'm not being a snob, darling," Eleanor interjected, her voice smooth as cream. "I'm being a realist. We just want the best for you. You have so much potential. We'd hate to see it limited." The word hung in the air, another arrow aimed at Liam. He was the limitation, the anchor holding their precious daughter back from the glittering life she was owed. Liam felt a familiar, cold knot tighten in his stomach. He had felt it 100 times before. Every family gathering, every holiday, every casual dinner was a new opportunity for them to remind him of his perceived inadequacy. They spoke of his modest two-bedroom apartment as cozy, his reliable sedan as practical, his deliberate, debt-free lifestyle as a lack of ambition. They saw his contentment as a character flaw. His gaze drifted to Chloe. He saw the faint blush of embarrassment on her cheeks, but he also saw the flicker of agreement in her eyes. A part of her believed them. A part of her was disappointed that he wasn't Julian Croft's son, that he didn't command nine-figure exits, that he didn't provide her with the casual, effortless opulence her parents represented. She loved him, he thought, but she was ashamed of the scale of his life. He reached into his pocket, his fingers closing around a small, cool, metallic object. It was a pen, a simple, sleek, black fountain pen. To anyone else, it was unremarkable. To Liam, it was a symbol. It had been a gift from Sheikh Al Jamil of Abu Dhabi, a token of appreciation after Liam's firm had successfully completed the design for a new cultural waterfront district, a project valued at over $4 billion. Liam had been the lead architect, the mind behind the entire visionary concept. Marcus Vance thought he built extensions. Liam was building legacies, shaping skylines. The pen in his pocket was worth more than the car Marcus drove. The irony was so thick he could taste it. He had cultivated this quiet life on purpose. He had seen what immense wealth did to people. The rot that set in, the isolation, the transactional nature of relationships. He had wanted to build a life on a foundation of something real, something earned. He had wanted a partner who loved him for the man he was, not the balance in his hidden accounts. He had chosen to live simply, to test the world, to test her. And every day she failed that test in small, heartbreaking ways. Later that evening, as he stood in the hallway waiting for Chloe to finish her goodbyes, he overheard her talking to Eleanor in the kitchen. Their voices were hushed, but the polished marble floors carried the sound perfectly. "I just don't know how long I can keep this up, Mother," Chloe said, her voice tight with frustration. "He has no drive. We went out with the Hendersons last week, and he spent the whole night talking about sustainable building materials. Bill Henderson just bought a yacht." "Patience, darling." Eleanor's voice was a soothing balm of poison. "You're still young. A man like Liam is a good starter husband. He's stable. He adores you. Let him build up a little nest egg. In the meantime, keep your eyes open. You've established your independence. You've shown you're not just waiting for a handout. When the right opportunity comes along, you'll be ready. For now, just manage the situation." Manage the situation. Liam felt the floor tilt beneath his feet. He wasn't her husband. He was a situation, a starter husband, a placeholder. He backed away from the hallway, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. When Chloe emerged moments later, smiling, she didn't notice the change in his eyes. She didn't see that the man she had been managing had just been replaced by someone else entirely. Someone colder, more patient, and far more strategic. As he helped her with her coat, his touch gentle and his smile unchanged, the first blueprint of a new, far more personal project began to form in the quiet, methodical corridors of his mind. He would design her a new reality, one built not on her assumptions, but on the truth, and he would make her live in it. The decision to fake his own paralysis was not born of a single, explosive moment of anger. It was the culmination of 1,000 small cuts, a slow and methodical emotional exsanguination. After the anniversary dinner, Liam began to move with the quiet deliberation of a man planning a siege. His public life remained a carefully curated tableau of unassuming normalcy. He continued to drive his modest sedan, to live in the apartment the Vances found so quaint, to be the dependable Liam they all thought they knew. But his private life became a whirlwind of clandestine activity. His first meeting was with David Chen, his partner at the firm Nexus Architectural Solutions. The name was deliberately anodyne, the firm's public profile almost non-existent. They didn't advertise. They didn't have a flashy website. Their clients came to them through word of mouth in the highest echelons of global finance and development. Nexus was a ghost, a phantom firm that handled projects of such scale and complexity that discretion was their most valuable asset. Liam wasn't just an architect at Nexus, he was the founding partner, the creative engine. David was the logistical and legal genius. They met not in their discreet downtown office, but in a secure, soundproofed conference room in the offices of David's family law firm, a place where no one would recognize Liam. "You want to do what?" David asked, his composure, for the first time in their decade-long partnership, completely shattered. He stared at Liam across the polished mahogany table as if seeing him for the first time. Liam was calm. He laid it all out. The constant humiliations, the overheard conversation, the gnawing, unbearable suspicion that his marriage was a lie. "It's an experiment, David. I need to know the truth. I can't build a life on a foundation of lies. You, of all people, should understand that." David, a man who navigated multi-billion-dollar contracts and hostile takeovers without breaking a sweat, ran a hand over his face. "Liam, this is insane. There are other ways. A private investigator, a direct confrontation." "I have the PI's report," Liam said, sliding a thin manila folder across the table. "It confirms she's been having lunch with her ex-boyfriend, a private equity manager her father adores. It's emotional for now, but the trajectory is clear. As for a confrontation, she'll lie, she'll cry, she'll perform. Her mother taught her well. I don't want a performance, David. I want the unvarnished truth. I want to see her soul when she thinks no one is looking." David opened the folder. He read for a few minutes, his expression hardening. He closed it and pushed it back toward Liam. "Her soul is a black hole, my friend. You don't need to throw yourself into it to prove that." "I do," Liam said, his voice quiet but unyielding. "For myself. I have to. I need to know that I gave her every chance. I will create a situation where her character is the only currency she has, and I will see what she does with it." Over the next 3 months, they planned it with the same meticulous detail they would a skyscraper. David's brother-in-law was an orthopedic surgeon at a private hospital, a man of unimpeachable integrity who owed David a significant favor. He was brought into the circle of trust. He would provide the diagnosis and manage the medical side of the charade. Next came the finances. This was Liam's domain. For years, his true wealth had been a hydra, its heads hidden in a labyrinth of trusts, holding companies, and offshore entities, all legally sound and utterly opaque. He spent a week with his wealth management team in Zurich, restructuring everything. He created a new central trust, the Bedrock Trust. The name was a private, bitter joke. All his primary assets were funneled into it. Then he drafted the trust's governing document, a masterpiece of legal engineering. In the event of his incapacitation, the trust would be managed by a board composed of David and 2 fiercely loyal international business partners who knew him only as Mr. Black, his nom de guerre in the world of high finance. But the document contained a critical, paradoxical clause. The incapacitated trustee, Liam himself, retained sole signatory power over any and all asset liquidation or fund transfers. Nothing could be moved or sold without his consent. It was a legal straitjacket. He then canceled his multi-million-dollar life insurance policy, the one Chloe was so interested in. The final step was the accident itself. Liam owned a shell corporation that had recently purchased a plot of land downtown for a future development. A half-finished steel skeleton of a small commercial building stood on the site. It was the perfect stage. They planned the fall, a slip, from a second-story girder onto a carefully prepared landing zone of concealed mats, out of sight from the street. An ambulance, staffed by a private team David hired, would be waiting a block away. During this time, his life with Chloe continued its slow, painful dance. He watched her with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a specimen. He saw the way her eyes lit up when she talked about her friends' new vacation homes. He noted her growing frustration with their budget. He endured dinners where she would scroll through Instagram, sighing at pictures of opulent parties in Mykonos and St. Bart's. One evening, he came home to find her surrounded by travel brochures. "Liam, look at this," she said, her eyes shining with an artificial brightness. "A 2-week cruise through the Greek islands. It's all inclusive. We could just put it on the credit card. We have to live a little." "Chloe, we're trying to save for a down payment on a bigger place, remember?" he said, reciting the lines of the character he was playing. "A cruise like that would set us back months." Her face fell. The mask of the happy wife dissolved into petulant anger. "A bigger place? You mean a slightly larger box to live our tiny little life in? Is this it, Liam? Is this all you ever want? Just this? Working your stable job, saving your stable little salary, living this stable, boring life? I want more. I deserve more." He looked at her, at the beautiful, discontented face of the woman he had once loved so desperately. He felt nothing. The emotional core of him had been hollowed out, replaced by a cold, quiet resolve. "You're right," he said softly. "You do deserve more." She mistook his words for concession. A triumphant smile touched her lips. "So we can go?" "No," he said, his voice still gentle. "But you're right. You deserve more than what you think this is." He walked into their bedroom, leaving her fuming and confused in the living room. That night he lay beside her in the dark, the warmth of her body a universe away. He wasn't her husband anymore. He was a ghost, waiting for the right moment to finally disappear. The next morning, he drove to the construction site. It was time. The day of the accident dawned clear and cold. A brisk autumn wind swept through the city, rattling the bare branches of the trees and carrying the scent of impending winter. Liam stood on the second-story steel girder of the unfinished building. The city spread out before him like a blueprint of his own life. He could see the sleek, glass tower of the Althorpe building, his first major project. To the east, the graceful curve of the Meridian Bridge, a design so innovative it had won him the prestigious Pritzker Prize, an award he'd accepted under a pseudonym to protect his privacy. He had helped build this world, shape its very skyline, all while living in the shadows, a king disguised as a commoner. He looked down. The site was empty, just as planned. David had ensured all crews were redirected for the day, citing a surprise structural inspection. Below him, hidden behind a stack of drywall, was the landing zone, a thick pile of high-density gymnastic mats. From the street, it would look like a fatal drop onto concrete and rebar. He took a deep breath, the cold air stinging his lungs. This was the precipice, the final moment before the plunge into the unknown. He thought of Chloe, not with anger, but with a profound, aching sadness. He had loved her. He had loved the woman he thought she was, the woman she had been in the beginning, before the poison of her family's ambition had seeped into her heart. He was not doing this to punish her. He was doing this to free them both from the lie they were living. Revenge was a messy, emotional affair. This was a controlled demolition. He took out his phone and sent a single, prearranged text to David. "Go." A block away, David would now be making the call. The private ambulance team would be starting their engine. The surgeon would be clearing his schedule. The first domino was pushed. Liam walked to the edge of the girder. He held onto a vertical support beam and leaned out, looking down one last time. He felt a moment of vertigo, a flicker of genuine fear. What if he miscalculated? What if this elaborate, insane plan went wrong? But then he thought of Chloe's voice in the kitchen. A good starter, husband. He thought of Marcus's dismissive sneer. He thought of the life that stretched before him, a long, slow pantomime of a happy marriage, and the fear vanished, replaced by a steely resolve. A false paralysis was better than a real and lifelong emotional one. He let go. For a split second, he was airborne, the wind rushing past his ears. It was a moment of absolute freedom. Then he hit the mats, the impact jarring but harmless. He rolled, just as he had practiced with the stunt coordinator David had hired. He came to a stop and lay perfectly still, face down, one arm twisted at an unnatural angle beneath him. He slowed his breathing, closed his eyes, and began the performance of a lifetime. He heard the distant wail of a siren growing closer. He heard the screech of tires, footsteps running, panicked voices, all part of the show, the paid actors in his drama. "Over here! Oh my God, somebody call 911!" He felt hands on him, rolling him gently onto a backboard. A neck brace was fitted. He focused on remaining completely, utterly limp. He was loaded into the ambulance. The doors slammed shut, and the world became a blur of motion and muffled voices. The next time he opened his eyes, he was in the hospital room, the stage for his final act, waiting for his leading lady to arrive. And now, 2 weeks later, the performance had moved to its second location, their apartment. The living room had been transformed into a sick room. A state-of-the-art hospital bed, paid for by the generous medical stipend from his trust, sat in the center of the room, facing the large picture window with its view of the park. It was a constant, looming presence, a monument to the tragedy that had shattered their lives. Liam, the silent, motionless figure in the bed, had become the new, grim centerpiece of their home. The air in the apartment was thick with a toxic cocktail of resentment, fear, and impatience. Chloe had been playing the part of the devoted, grieving wife to the outside world, accepting casseroles from sympathetic neighbors and fielding calls from concerned friends with a weary, tragic grace. But inside the apartment, when the door was closed, the mask came off. She moved around him with a barely concealed irritation, her sighs heavy with martyrdom. She was a jailer, and he was her prisoner, and they were both trapped in this sun-filled, elegant cage. Today was the day he had been waiting for, the family meeting. Marcus and Eleanor were coming over to discuss the future. Liam, feigning a heavily medicated state, lay with his eyes closed, his breathing slow and deep. He was a fly on the wall of his own life, invisible, listening. He heard the key in the lock. The door opened, and their voices filled the space. "How is he?" Eleanor asked, her voice a stage whisper. "The same," Chloe replied, her tone flat and exhausted. "He just lies there. The nurse gave him his afternoon sedative an hour ago. He's completely out of it." "Good," Marcus said, his voice a low rumble. He walked into the living room, his expensive leather shoes sinking into the plush rug. He stopped by the window, looking down at the hospital bed with the detached air of a man inspecting faulty equipment. "Right, let's get down to business. We can't let this situation drift. We need a plan." Chloe sank onto the sofa, running a hand through her hair. "A plan for what, Daddy? My life is over. I'm a full-time nurse to a vegetable who can't even talk." "Don't be dramatic, Chloe," Marcus snapped, his patience already wearing thin. "This is a setback, not a death sentence. Financially, at least. We need to be practical. First, this apartment. It's in his name. We need to get power of attorney to sell it. The market is high. We can move you into something more manageable, and you can bank the difference. And his portfolio? Eleanor added, sitting next to Chloe and taking her hand. He must have some investments. A 401k? We need to get control of his assets. For your sake, darling, to protect your future. They spoke about him as if he weren't there. They dissected his life, his assets, his future, with the cold precision of vultures carving up a carcass. They saw him not as a man, not as their son-in-law or husband, but as a collection of accounts to be liquidated. Liam lay still, his heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. He felt no anger, only a profound, chilling clarity. This was who they were, not cruel in their own minds, just practical. Their world was a balance sheet, and he was now a liability to be managed, his assets to be reallocated. The lawyer is coming at 3, Chloe said. David Chen. He was Liam's partner at that little firm. He's handling the estate. He said we need to go over some things. Good, Marcus said, nodding. We'll have him draw up the paperwork for power of attorney. This should be straightforward. With a medical diagnosis this severe, no judge will object. He glanced at Liam again, a flicker of contempt in his eyes. He was never going to amount to much, Chloe. In a way, this simplifies things. It's a tragedy, of course, but every tragedy has a silver lining. The words hung in the air, obscene in their callousness. Liam cataloged them, filed them away with all the others. A good starter husband. Manage the situation. Simplifies things. He was building a case in his mind, and the evidence was damning. He listened to them talk for another 20 minutes, their voices a low murmur of greed and strategy. They were so confident, so sure of their position. They were the strong ones, the survivors, picking through the ruins of his life. They had no idea that the man lying motionless in the bed was the architect of those ruins, and he was about to bring the whole rotten structure down on their heads. The doorbell rang, a sharp, clean chime that cut through the stale air. That must be the lawyer, Chloe said, getting up. Marcus straightened his tie. Right, let's handle this. Remember, Chloe, you are the grieving widow. Let me do the talking. Liam heard the door open. He heard David's calm, professional voice offering condolences. The final actor had arrived on stage. The quiet before the storm was over. It was time for the rain to fall. David Chen entered the living room with a somber expression and a heavy leather briefcase. He was the picture of professional grief, his dark suit immaculate, his face a mask of solemnity. He nodded at Marcus and Eleanor before turning his attention to Chloe. Chloe, I am so deeply sorry for what you and Liam are going through, he said, his voice pitched with the perfect blend of sympathy and legal authority. It's an unspeakable tragedy. Thank you for coming, David, Chloe said, her own performance clicking back into place. She gestured weakly toward the sofa. Please. Marcus, however, remained standing, assuming his role as the family patriarch. Mr. Chen, a terrible business. We're all devastated, but we must be practical. Chloe is going to need help managing Liam's affairs. We were hoping you could expedite the process for securing power of attorney. David sat down, placing his briefcase on the coffee table with a soft thud. He didn't open it immediately. He looked from Marcus's impatient face to Chloe's carefully constructed mask of sorrow. Then, his gaze lingered for a moment on the still figure in the hospital bed. Of course, David said calmly. Liam had very specific instructions in place for an eventuality like this. He was always a meticulous planner. He finally clicked open the latches on his briefcase. The sound was sharp, definitive, like the cocking of a gun. He asked me, as his legal counsel, to go over these documents with you personally, Chloe. Marcus, Eleanor, it is probably best that you are here for this as well. He pulled out a thick, handsomely bound document. This is Liam's last will and testament, updated 6 months ago. Marcus leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. This was the heart of the matter. It's quite straightforward, David continued, flipping to the signature page. In the event of his death, his entire estate, property, investments, all assets, passes to his spouse, Chloe Vance. A collective, unspoken sigh of relief filled the room. Chloe's shoulders relaxed. Marcus gave a small, satisfied nod. It was exactly as they'd expected. Simple, clean. However, David said, his tones shifting subtly, the word landed in the center of the room like a stone dropped into a still pond. We are not dealing with a death, but an incapacitation, and that is governed by a different set of directives. Let's start with the most immediate query you had on the day of the accident, Chloe. Chloe stiffened. I don't know what you mean. The life insurance policy, David said, his voice gentle but his eyes sharp as glass. The multi-million-dollar policy he took out when you bought this apartment. I'm afraid I have some bad news on that front. Liam canceled that policy just over 6 months ago. The silence in the room was absolute, a sudden vacuum. Chloe's face, which had been composed in tragic lines, went slack with genuine shock. What? That's impossible. Why would he do that? He never told me. He was under no obligation to, David said smoothly. He was the sole policyholder. As for why, he decided to redirect those premium payments into a more robust asset management vehicle. He reached back into his briefcase and pulled out an even thicker document, this one bound in dark blue. The words, "The Bedrock Trust," were embossed in gold on the cover. He funneled almost his entire net worth into this irrevocable trust, David explained, placing it on the table. It is the legal owner of this apartment, his investment portfolios, his intellectual property, everything. And the trust's governance in the event of his incapacitation is very specific. Marcus's face was a thundercloud of suspicion. What does that mean, specific? Who controls it? You? No, David said, allowing himself a small, thin smile. According to the articles of the trust, in the event of the primary trustee's incapacitation, the management of the trust's assets falls to a pre-selected board. However, and this is the critical clause, all power regarding the liquidation of assets or the transfer of major funds remains with the primary trustee. No one can sell this apartment. No one can touch his stock portfolio, not without the trustee's direct consent. Marcus let out a short, barking laugh of disbelief. But the trustee is incapacitated. He's lying right there. He can't consent to anything. It's a paradox. Not legally, David countered. The consent can be given upon his recovery or through a designated proxy outlined in a separate, sealed letter of instruction. But for now, it means everything is frozen, locked down completely. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. He was enjoying this, Liam realized. David, the consummate professional, was savoring the moment of righteous justice. Chloe looked frantic. The foundation of her future was crumbling before her eyes. Frozen? What are we supposed to live on? How are we supposed to pay for his care? The nurses, the equipment, it costs a fortune. Ah, David said, his expression becoming sympathetic once more. Liam planned for that as well. He was nothing if not thorough. He pulled a final, single sheet of paper from the file. The trust provides a monthly stipend for his medical care. It is quite generous, covering all projected expenses, the best equipment, 24-hour nursing if needed. He wanted to ensure he received the absolute best care. He slid the paper across the table to Chloe. It also provides for a monthly spousal allowance to cover living expenses while you are acting as his primary caregiver. Chloe snatched the paper, her eyes scanning it desperately. Liam knew the number on that page. He had chosen it himself. It was a carefully calculated figure, just enough to cover utilities, property taxes, and a modest grocery budget. It was less than what she typically spent on clothes and lunches in a month. It was an allowance, a pittance, a golden cage. Her face, when she looked up, was a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. The performance was over. The truth was out. She wasn't a grieving wife who would be inheriting a fortune. She was a glorified, unpaid nurse with a tiny budget, shackled to the man she had hoped to be free of. Her gaze snapped from the paper to the motionless figure in the bed. Her eyes, which hours before had shed perfect, photogenic tears, were now burning with hatred. "You," she whispered, her voice trembling with rage. "You did this. Somehow you planned this. You did this to me." And in that moment, Liam made a decision. It was not part of the original script, but her raw, honest hatred demanded a response. He had planned to remain unconscious for another week, but this was too perfect. Slowly, with immense, deliberate effort, he let his eyelids flutter open. He didn't move his head. He didn't move his body. He just opened his eyes and stared directly at her. His eyes were not clouded with medication or vacant with injury. They were perfectly clear, sharply intelligent, and as cold and hard as polished stone. He said nothing. He just looked at her, letting his clear, conscious gaze be the final, devastating revelation. "I am here. I am aware. And I have heard everything." The gasp Chloe let out was not a performance. It was the sound of a soul snapping in two. She stumbled back from the bed as if he had struck her hand flying to her throat. Marcus and Eleanor stared, mouths agape, their faces a mixture of terror and disbelief. The motionless invalid was gone. In his place was a judge, a jury, and an executioner, all wrapped in the still, silent body of the man they had so fatally underestimated. The room was plunged into a suffocating silence, broken only by the soft, rhythmic sigh of the ventilator Liam no longer needed, but which served as the perfect, ominous soundtrack to this scene. Chloe stared at him, her face pale, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. She was looking at a ghost, but a ghost who held all the power. Then Liam spoke. He had practiced this for weeks, learning to use only the minimal muscles required to make his voice sound weak, raspy, and strained. The effort was purely theatrical, but the effect was chillingly authentic. "My life insurance," he rasped, each word a seeming struggle. "That was your first question, Chloe." He let the accusation hang in the air, a venomous dart. He didn't look at David, but he could feel his partner's satisfaction, a silent, powerful presence in the room. "Before you asked if I was in pain," Liam continued, his gaze unwavering, pinning Chloe in place. "Before you held my hand and meant it, you asked about the money." He slowly, deliberately shifted his gaze to Marcus, who looked as if he'd been turned to stone. "And you, Marcus, you were at the City Club last month. You told Bill Henderson that your daughter had married a temporary inconvenience. That was the term you used, wasn't it?" Marcus's jaw worked, but no sound came out. Liam's eyes found Eleanor, who was shrinking into the sofa cushions, trying to make herself invisible. "Eleanor, you told Chloe to bleed him dry and find a real man. On the phone, the week after our anniversary, you thought I was in the shower. The water was running, but I was standing right outside the door." He was reciting his list of grievances. Each one was a perfectly aimed shot, a truth they could not deny. He was holding up the moral mirror, forcing them to look at their own ugly reflections. They squirmed under his gaze, their arrogance and confidence evaporating like mist. "You judged me," he said, his voice gaining a fraction more strength, a cold, hard edge. "You judged my worth by the car I drove, by the square footage of my apartment. You sneered at my stable job. Did any of you even once ask me what I actually do? What I build?" He paused, letting them stew in their own shame. "Let me tell you, you admire the Althorpe building, Marcus. You told me it was a masterpiece of modern design. I was the lead architect. My firm designed it. Your bank, the one you're so proud of, leases the top 10 floors from a holding company that I own." He turned his gaze back to Chloe. "That restaurant you love, Saison, the one you're always trying to get a reservation at? I designed the interior. The owner is a personal friend and a client. The Henderson's yacht you were so envious of? My firm designed the marina it's docked in. He let the revelations fall one by one, quiet bombs that systematically dismantled their entire perception of him and of their own world. Their social standing, the places they frequented, the status symbols they revered. He was connected to them all, not as a spectator, but as the hidden architect, the invisible hand. My entire life, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, but carrying more weight than ever, has been a deliberate choice. I wanted to build a marriage based on something real, not on the glitter of wealth. I wanted a partner who saw me, not my potential for acquisition. I gave you a simple life to see if it was enough, to see if I was enough. The silence that followed was profound. It was the silence of utter demolition. They had no defense. There was nothing to say. He had spoken only the truth. Finally, he delivered the ultimatum. The doctors have told you I may never walk again, he said, the lie tasting like justice on his tongue. So, Chloe, you have a choice. The choice I have designed for you. You can stay. You can be my devoted wife, my caregiver. You can live in this beautiful prison with me on the allowance the trust provides. You can hold my hand and spoon-feed me and tell the world what a brave, long-suffering woman you are. He paused, his eyes boring into hers. Or you can leave. You can walk out that door right now. But if you do, you walk out with nothing. Our prenuptial agreement, the one your father insisted on to protect your assets from the poor architect, is ironclad. It protects me too. And the moment you leave, David will file for divorce on the grounds of abandonment and infidelity. The choice is yours. Stay and serve your sentence, or leave and be free with absolutely nothing. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been inverted, shattered, and remade. The man in the bed, the helpless invalid, was now their king, their judge, their jailer. He held their past, their present, and their future in the palm of his hand, a hand that for now he kept perfectly, powerfully still. The weeks that followed were a slow, agonizing descent into a domestic hell of Liam's own creation. Chloe stayed. Of course she stayed. The alternative, public humiliation, and a future devoid of the wealth she felt was her birthright, was unthinkable. But she stayed as a prisoner, not a partner. The apartment, once a stage for her social aspirations, became a gilded cage, and the man in the bed was her silent, watchful warden. The atmosphere was thick with a palpable, suffocating resentment. Every action she took was freighted with bitterness. The way she fluffed his pillows was aggressive. The way she administered his medication was impatient. She spoke to him in clipped, cold tones, abandoning all pretense of affection the moment the hired nurse left for the day. She was performing the duties of a caretaker, but her soul was screaming in protest. Liam, for his part, maintained his silent, motionless vigil. He watched her. He listened to her muttered curses under her breath. He heard her long, frustrated phone calls with her parents. Marcus and Eleanor had hired a team of expensive lawyers to try and break the trust. They had found it to be an impenetrable fortress. David Chen had done his work too well. Every potential loophole was sealed, every contingency planned for. They were, in a word, beaten. Their public downfall was as swift as it was brutal. The story, as these stories always do, began to leak. It started as whispers at the country club, then became gossip at charity galas, then a full-blown scandal meticulously seeded into the right columns by a public relations firm David had hired. The narrative was perfect. The brilliant, secretly powerful architect, struck down by tragedy, only to be betrayed by his gold-digging wife and her grasping, avaricious family. The Vances, who had built their entire identity on a foundation of social standing and perceived influence, found themselves pariahs. Friends stopped returning their calls. Invitations dried up. Their world, once a warm bath of admiration and deference, had become an icy sea of contempt. One rain-swept afternoon, About a month into the charade, Chloe finally broke. She had just gotten off the phone with her mother, who had been weeping over a canceled invitation to a major gallery opening. Chloe slammed the phone down and turned to the bed, her face a twisted mask of rage and despair. "Are you happy now?" she shrieked, her voice raw. "Is this what you wanted? You've ruined me. You've ruined my family, all because you have a bruised ego." Liam remained silent, his eyes fixed on her. Her rage escalated, feeding on his silence. "I hate you. I wish you had died in that fall. It would have been better for everyone. At least then I would have been free." It was the ugliest truth she had yet spoken, the final confession. At that exact moment, the key turned in the front door. It opened and David Chen walked in. He was not alone. Beside him stood a woman with a calm, intelligent face and kind eyes, dressed in smart athletic wear. She carried a professional-looking medical bag. Behind them were two burly men in polo shirts bearing the logo of a physical therapy company, wheeling a specialized-looking reclining chair. David's eyes took in the scene, Chloe screaming, her face contorted with hate, Liam lying still and silent. A slow, cold smile touched David's lips. "Am I interrupting something?" he asked, his voice dangerously mild. Chloe spun around, startled. "What are you doing here?" "We have an appointment," David said smoothly. He gestured to the woman beside him. "Chloe, I don't believe you've had the pleasure of being formally introduced. This is Dr. Eris Thorne. She is Liam's lead physical therapist, and, as it happens, his fiancée." The word fiancé detonated in the silent room. Chloe's world, already fractured, shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Her jaw dropped. "Fiancé?" she stammered, looking from the calm, poised woman to Liam, her mind unable to process the statement. Liam decided the time for silence was over. The final act had begun. With a deliberate, theatrical slowness, he reached up his right hand, a hand that had lain limp and useless for over a month, and picked up a small remote control from the bedside table. He pressed a button. The whir of an electric motor filled the room as the head of the hospital bed began to rise, lifting him into a sitting position. He looked at Chloe, his expression no longer cold, but filled with a deep, weary sadness. Then, he swung his legs over the side of the bed. His feet, clad in simple hospital socks, touched the hardwood floor. He pushed himself up, his movements fluid and strong. He stood. He took one steady step forward, then another. He was not paralyzed. He had never been paralyzed. He walked toward the center of the room, stopping a few feet from his wife, his posture perfect, his body radiating a quiet, controlled power. Chloe stared, her face a canvas of disbelief, horror, and dawning, crushing comprehension. The entire elaborate month-long ordeal, the fall, the diagnosis, the helplessness, it was all a lie, a test, a trap, and she had walked right into it. Liam looked into her eyes, the eyes of a stranger he had once shared a bed with. "The real paralysis, Chloe," he said, his voice now clear, strong, and full of a profound sorrow, "was never in my spine. It was in our marriage. It was in your heart." The final confrontation was not loud or angry. It was quiet, devastating, and final. Liam, standing free and whole in the center of the living room that had been his stage and his prison, explained everything. He spoke without malice, his voice a calm, steady current of truth. He detailed the planning, the accident, the reasons. He omitted only the name of Eris, who was not his fiancée, but his oldest and dearest friend, a brilliant doctor who had agreed to play the part for this final, decisive scene. The romantic lie was a small, sharp jab of poetic justice, a final twist of the knife that Chloe's own behavior had warranted. "I didn't do this for revenge, Chloe," he said, his voice gentle. "Revenge is for people who still have something to prove. I did this for clarity. I couldn't spend the rest of my life wondering if the woman I love would stand by me in a storm, or if she would just start looking for the nearest lifeboat. Chloe had no fight left. All the anger, all the resentment had been purged from her, leaving behind a hollow, empty shell. She sank onto the sofa, her body folding in on itself. She was finally, truly defeated. "The divorce papers are already drawn up," Liam continued, his tone becoming more businesslike. David stepped forward and placed a neat stack of documents on the coffee table. "I'm not going to leave you with nothing. That's not who I am." He explained the terms. He was giving her a one-time settlement. It was a substantial sum, enough for her to get a small apartment, to live comfortably for a year or two while she figured out what to do with her life. It was enough to start over, but it was not enough to maintain even a fraction of the lavish lifestyle she had coveted. It was more than she deserved, but it was a gesture that allowed Liam to maintain the moral high ground. It was an act of mercy, not obligation. "Wealth was never the point, Chloe," he said, his voice softening once more. "It was just a tool, a lens to see things more clearly. The real currencies in this life are integrity, respect, and love. You didn't value any of them. I hope, for your sake, that one day you learn to." She didn't respond. She just sat there staring at the papers that officially ended the life she had thought was just beginning. Marcus and Eleanor, who had been frozen in place by the door, were now ushered out by one of the physical therapy assistants. Their faces were ashen. Their reign was over. Their future was a bleak landscape of social exile and financial recalibration. They would not starve, but their currency, status, was now worthless. Their punishment was to live out their days in the quiet, comfortable obscurity they had always so desperately feared. It was a perfect, poetic justice. Months later, the scene is different. The air is clean and smells of cedar and sea salt. Liam stands on the deck of a house he designed and built for himself, nestled into a cliffside overlooking the Pacific Ocean. It's not a mansion. It's a masterpiece of minimalist architecture, all clean lines, warm wood, and vast expanses of glass that blur the line between inside and out. It's a house that is in harmony with its surroundings, a house that is honest and authentic. Era stands beside him, her hand resting comfortably in his. Their friendship, forged in childhood and tested by this bizarre conspiracy, had deepened into something more in the aftermath. In helping him escape a false life, they had discovered a true one together. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked, her eyes on the horizon where the sun was melting into the sea. "The lengths you went to." Liam was silent for a moment, watching the waves crash against the rocks below. "I regret that it was necessary," he said finally. "I regret that I chose a person who required such a test. But I don't regret finding the truth. Living a comfortable lie is the most profound paralysis of all." He had lost a wife, but he had regained himself. He was no longer hiding his success, but he wasn't flaunting it either. He was simply living it, quietly and authentically. He was still the principle of Nexus, still shaping skylines and building legacies, but he was no longer a ghost. He was a man, whole and free. The story of Liam and Chloe became a quiet legend in certain circles, a cautionary tale about the difference between price and value. True worth, Liam had learned, is not something that can be displayed or acquired. It is not measured in square feet or stock portfolios. It is the quiet, unshakable integrity that resides within. It is the strength to demand the truth, the patience to wait for it, and the wisdom to know what to do with it when it finally reveals itself. Arrogance builds castles on sand, but character, he now knew, is the bedrock upon which a true life is built. Liam found out the truth in the most dramatic way imaginable. He had to fake a tragedy to reveal a real one. What do you think? Was he justified in his elaborate deception, or did he go too far? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every one. And if this story resonated with you, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Because everyone deserves to see that in the end, truth and integrity are the most powerful assets of all.